All right, welcome everyone. The hour of 12 noon being upon us. This meeting of the Daily Line press box is called to order. My name is Alex Nitkin. I'm editor and City Hall reporter of the Daily Line. I'm here with my partner in crime, fellow City Hall reporter, Erin Hegarty. What's up, Erin?
Hey.
And for the first time, special guest, Tribune, City Hall, and politics reporter, Greg Pratt. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you very much.
So, lots to talk about today. If this is your first time tuning into a press box event, we try to do these roughly every month, usually after city council meetings to sort of recap all of the city council business and policy and coming from the Lightfoot administration. This month is a little bit jumbled, a little bit different because we're talking about the budget and trying to sort of mix in regular city council business. And then, of course, we also have this big word remap coming up in the next month or two. So we're going to try to sort of fit in that whole hodgepodge today. We're going to be starting just sort of laying out the timeline of the budget, going over the 2 full weeks of all-day departmental budget hearings when we learned a lot over the end of September, early October. Going to talk about the sort of negotiation sausage-making process that is underway right now as city council caucuses try to negotiate tweaks here and there into the mayor's budget, and talk about some ordinances and amendments that have already been introduced on that front. We'll touch on the ward remap and that last week's city council meeting when a lot of different kinds of business got done and there was a public hearing. We will touch on some other sort of miscellaneous items that are driving the day and then leave some time for questions. So there is a box on the side. We really want to encourage anyone who has any questions at all to just type them in. We will get to them. If we see them during, we can sort of pepper them in. Otherwise, we'll leave some time at the end. If you want some information and just background on what is in Mayor Lightfoot's $16.7 billion 2022 budget proposal and her corresponding Chicago recovery plan, we spent a lot of time digging into that and talking about the details of it in our last press box last month. That was when Erin and I were joined by Crane's reporter A.D. Quigg. That is all on YouTube, as are all of our press box archives. Would definitely encourage everyone to go look at that. So, starting off, we entered into this whole conversation, had the last press box right after September 20th, when the mayor introduced her entire big package, and we were left to sort of pick through it. And then we went through the departmental budget hearings. Erin, these hearings were all in person, right? With no remote option at all, which I think surprised and kind of miffed some aldermen and maybe changed the way that participation happened.
Yeah. So up until basically these budget hearings, virtually all of the committee meetings since the pandemic started have been held virtually. And, it's convenient, more convenient to attend, a meeting on your computer. But also, some aldermen are still concerned with, how safe it is to be in City Hall with other aldermen, other, members of the public to attend these meetings. But yeah, Alderman Pat Dowell, she's the chair of the budget committee. She kind of laid down the hammer and said, no, you have no virtual option. You have to be here in person. And that kind of, I was in the chambers for a lot of these meetings, and several of them didn't start until about an hour after they were scheduled. Most of them. Because they couldn't meet quorum. So aldermen literally had to be in City Hall. They couldn't attend virtually, and that kind of, everything got done, right? But it's kind of delayed.
Change the dynamic.
Yeah.
That was fascinating to watch, though. Just a whole bunch of people saying, "Now I'll show up to work when I'm ready to show up to work." Was just really interesting. Not necessarily the finest moment of the body.
Yeah, and this was a moment when engaged citizen George Blakemore came up, and we actually noticed he really took them to task for that. And this is one of those moments where we have some of that outside perspective. He was literally just saying, like, why aren't you all here? You're all late. Maybe he had a point. So here we are. It is Wednesday, the 20th of October. Tomorrow, we are expecting a finance committee and a budget committee the day after that. These were interestingly both supposed to be in person, but now they've been made virtual at the urging of the mayor's office. Tomorrow, finance committee is going to take up what's called the revenue ordinance, which is the property tax levy and everything associated with how the city is going to raise its money. And then Friday is going to be the management and appropriation ordinance, which is basically everything that money is paying for. There's a city council meeting right now scheduled for Monday. And what we expect, I think, to happen at this point is that it'll then get what's called deferred and published. And then the budget will come up for a final vote on Wednesday. That was what was originally scheduled. That Wednesday meeting is not scheduled right now, but Wednesday is kind of right now what we expect to be that final day when all the aldermen take turns sort of speechifying and saying why they support or don't support the budget. Greg, how many budgets does this make for you that you've covered with the city?
Four.
So I guess I asked because, I wonder this budget season, just sort of tonally and the way that it has felt so far, I want to ask you to compare it to previous years and particularly last year. I mean, how does this budget process feel different than last year?
That's a strange budget cycle compared to the last year. It's a very it's a wish list budget. It's a re-election budget for sure, because you have all this extra money that you're using for all sorts of important projects. I was going to call them pet projects, but I'm not trying to diminish them. They're important projects, but they're also politically palatable projects. And so you have a ton of money for all of this going on. And yet there's a very interesting undercurrent where there's some real opposition to the modest property tax increase and to the basic income, which is, last year there was last year's budget system to just set the stage a little bit also was ominous all year. The mayor was struggling very hard for a very long time to get people on board. She had to make a bunch of cuts. She had to threaten aldermen not to come to her for S. I don't know if I can say the word, but she had to threaten aldermen. I mean, last year's budget cycle was ominous, and this one, because it's got the big wish list, it's I think there's a perception it'll be easier, but from talking to aldermen recently, a lot of the conservative Northwest, Southwest side aldermen are not committing yet to the budget. Some of the reason the budget passed last year was because three lefties who voted against it in 2019 voted for it in 2020. That was Mike
Talking
Rodriguez,
about Maria Haddon, Andre Vasquez,
and Mike Rodriguez. They were no's and they became yeses. Maria and Andre especially caught hell from their constituents for voting for that budget. So, this year is a better budget for their purposes, for progressive purposes. So it's last year was ominous, and this one, it feels a little foreboding, but it's not clear yet to me how it's going to break. But she's possibly lost Gil Villegas, who was her floor leader last year and is no longer her floor leader. So it's there's different permutations, but it's really interesting, and those dynamics are still really unfolding.
Yeah, Gil Villegas is now the chairman again of the City Council Latino Caucus, and has had a lot of, been clashing with the administration in several ways in that way, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. It's interesting, in theory, it would be a lot easier for people to just line up and vote for this because it's not as painful as last year's budget, right? Except that, I don't know, when you think about it, is just as much to fight over in a way. It's just that now you're fighting over who gets what of this additional money from the federal government, as opposed to who is going to feel the most pain from all the cuts. You were talking about the property tax levy, and I'm going to try and remember some of these numbers off the top of my head, but this year, the mayor's budget is calling to raise the property tax levy by about $77 million, which is less than the $94 million proposed last year. But about 20 million of that 77 million is going to be sort of an automatic increase tied to a raise in the consumer price index that was instituted as part of the budget last year as part of Lightfoot's budget plan. And if you listen to her budget address last month, one of her lines right at the outset was, this budget includes no new taxes, fines, fees, or layoffs. And I think that the word new is kind of doing some work in that sentence, because there are additional taxes. It's just that it was sort of announced based on her previous schedule. So I think that's what we are all trying to, like you said, Greg, some of those more conservative aldermen are not concerned, partially on that basis and also partially because of police staffing, which we're going to talk about. But that seems like a big underlying factor that's a bit of a question mark at this point. So departmental budget hearings got underway September 24th. They lasted 15 days. And I want to quickly just run through some of the biggest takeaways that we got out of these hearings. For me, I think top of mind was just the fact that, we are talking across all kinds of realms about a labor shortage across the economy. And I think that it was really made clear how much that applies to the city of Chicago right now. Almost every single department, especially the larger ones, commissioners were talking about, we have 50 vacancies, 90 vacancies, 110 vacancies, really much more than is normal, and especially is going to present a challenge for the city's human resources department and just the city writ large as it tries to accept and spend all of this federal money. It's going to have to staff up. And so that was something that really struck me. And I know that, Greg, you had noticed, remarked on particularly in the law department, there's about almost a 50% vacancy within the law department's federal civil rights litigation, which is responsible for defending the city from lawsuits against the police department. You said that number was pretty astonishing, right?
Yeah, it's horrific, right? Like it's a massive chunk of the people handling the most sensitive, most expensive cases, the most damaging to public safety, because they're the ones that involve people who were wronged by police, which people take as the example of this is what's wrong with the city. This is why we can't trust police. They're the most expensive, and we don't have a crew staffed up to handle it. It's a really, there's and in my own reporting and in my reporting and analysis, I often point out critically that, the city really struggles, probably more than usual, to make hires the way it's supposed to, and to just make sure that the trains are running on time. And you see it every single day with all sorts of things that go wrong or that lag or that are messed up.
So, Erin, you were covering one of the, I think, longer and maybe more noteworthy, maybe unexpectedly so, departmental hearings, which was the Department of Water Management. It has a lot of kind of tumultuous recent history, I would say, with some scandals involving, bullying, abuse, racial issues, racist issues within the department. But what came up during the hearing, that very long hearing that they were holding with Andrea Chang, the new commissioner of Water Department?
Yeah, so I think, it's not, it's not news that the city is, very slow and behind on replacing lead service lines. But it did take a while during that budget hearing for that question to come up, for, someone to ask point blank, like, where are we on this task? And Andrea Chang, it was her, first budget, and she kind of promoted the fact that the city has replaced 10 of, some 10,000 lead service lines that it has to replace under this equity program. And like, Greg, you did reporting, right, or the Tribune did reporting on, I think at some point earlier this year, it was less than 10. But yeah, she kind of touted that number, which was kind of funny to me, because like, that's less than 1% of the work that has to be done. I know that, the city is waiting on some federal money that it's expecting to come through for this, but I'm not an official in the water department. I don't know. I've never replaced a lead service line, but that was surprising to me. And
well, for context, Erin, right? They say they wanted to do about 700, a little less than 700. So 10 is a fraction of that. So it's not just like to us as all laymen, but it's also they're failing their own standards.
Yes, exactly. And the head of the water department also caught a lot of flack for contracting that isn't as diverse as aldermen would like, which I mean, it's not only the water department that is facing that criticism. That was pretty much across the board. Every department, you have aldermen who want people working on the city to look like their communities, not just white companies who are owned by white men.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really consistent theme that we see in a lot of different departments, and especially, Black and Latino caucus members in the city council are really drilling down on trying to make sure that these, first of all, the city's what's called the MWBE and MBEWBE Minority Business Enterprise and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Program is fully realized, and also that each individual department is actually seeing through diverse contracting in their hires and their contracting moves that came up during Department of Assets, Information and Services, which we're about to talk about in a second. Interestingly, it didn't really as much come up in Department of Aviation, which is a department that has really been dogged by those kinds of questions and challenges about the diverse hiring practices, diverse contracting practices. You see here, Alderman Leslie Hairston was really taking Commissioner Chang to task about this in the water department, saying it hasn't gotten better in all the time that she's been here. And then a couple hours later, the aviation hearing was right after that, and Hairston basically said, like, you're doing great, no notes. So that seemed like a real turn and a sign that aldermen are seemingly more satisfied with the job that Aviation Commissioner Jamie Rhee is doing there. On the police department, yeah, go ahead.
To not get questions from Alderwoman Hairston is that's a compliment, I think. She's got a lot.
I don't think any of us were around for Helen Schiller, but who was famous for asking hundreds of questions throughout the cycle, and she would not vote for it if she didn't get an answer. Not necessarily the substance of it, but she needs an answer. Hairston's kind of the Schiller of today, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's just, sometimes I find it useful to think about the personalities here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the many ways that watching these hearings was informative, not just to hear the departments answer all of these questions, but to, see how the different aldermen take, their approaches to asking the questions. Some are just completely silent. I think that Alderman Burke and Alderman Gardner, to name two, I don't recall either of them asking any questions. Correct me if I'm wrong, Erin, or if you saw them, but there were others like, Andre Vasquez and certainly Alderman Hairston and Maria Haddon are sort of there consistently taking their time. Alderman Lopez is another who comes to mind. But we should move on here. Police department, it was a long, long hearing. Erin, you were covering most of it, and we were sort of tag teaming it. Their hiring and vacancies were a major, major concern for the city council. They have about 1,000, a little more than 1,000 vacancies right now, or maybe just under 1,000 vacancies. And a big topic of the conversation was how many of those vacancies they can actually fill in the next year, right, Erin?
Right, yeah. So the approximately 1,000 vacancies, that's in the context of about a little over 14,000, full-time positions that the department has. And this is coming at a time when people have said it repeatedly. It's a hard time to be a cop, I guess, and people might not be as willing to go into this line of work as they were previously. And Brown kind of noted that the department's attrition rate usually is about 4 to 5%, but this year it's it's closer to 6%. And they're seeing people retire before they're reaching retirement age, or leave the department before they're reaching retirement age, which it's they're getting hit on both sides of the spectrum. It's hard to recruit people. Testing was delayed by COVID, and you're losing people who have been there for a longer period of time. They did say that they have about 1,900 people lined up for the test that are, this month, November and December, but, they expect to hire about 200 people by the end of the year, but they also expect to lose 121 from the department by the end of the year. So yeah,
they got to swim against that current of constantly losing people.
And he kind of called on, he called on like aldermen to promote, jobs in the police department to people in their wards. I don't know, there are some aldermen who will absolutely do that, but I don't know that everyone's going to go out and say, hey, work for the police department. And they can't even logistically fill all of the vacancies that they currently have, which is, they can fill like two-thirds of them. So it's going to be interesting to see how this pans out over the next year.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of that lead pipe conversation and the fact that the lead service lines, in that there are two questions. One is how much funding you have for what you want to do, and then the other is just logistical bottlenecks and how much you can feasibly do. And I think that we saw an example of, with the police budget, everyone, the discourse is around how much money do you put into the police department, but it seems like the much more operative factor here is how many bodies the police department and the Department of Human Resources can actually put into those positions. And it seems like it's going to be a struggle to continue to build up that department. You mentioned that they are trying to catch up on academy classes that were canceled at the sort of height of the lockdown period of the pandemic. They're holding a bunch of classes sort of rapid fire in the next couple months here. The fire department, though, has a sort of a different recruitment process. Their last entrance exam, and this blew my mind when I learned it, was in 2014. They have literally been recruiting off of the same list of 20,000 some odd people who passed this test in 2014. And this came up in the hearing with Nance Holt, who's the new commissioner of the fire department. And she was basically saying, like, yeah, it's kind of an old list now. Certainly people who passed the test in 2014 are not necessarily going to be wanting to join now. So there's going to be finally a new test next year. And she was talking about this as an opportunity to diversify the fire department a little bit, which she had really, claimed at the outset was one of her foremost goals. This is a department that is about 90% men and about 65% white. And she really tried to impress upon the city council, both with her sort of diverse leadership team that she had assembled, and also just the sort of symbolism of her own presence as the first ever Black woman commissioner of the fire department, that this is going to be a real focus of hers, and she's going to try to use this test as a way to advance that. I wanted to throw in a mention of the Department of Assets, Information and Services, because they are going to be embarking on a big push to modernize, upgrade the city's tech infrastructure and software and hardware over the next 10 years. This is about a $400 million plan. And we were talking about Alderman Villegas, who was Mayor Lightfoot's floor leader, and we have seen him really go after the administration now on, I would say, two major prongs. One being this issue of Latino representation within hiring, and another being this really interesting push that he has made as chairman of the Economic Development Committee to reverse her administration's 2019 decision to merge the Department of Fleet and Facilities Management and the Department of Innovation and Technology. They were merged into the AIS department in 2019. He says that was a bad idea. We should reverse it. He's introduced a resolution to do that. He's trying to really be on the department's butt about upgrading technology, and he had some contentious exchanges with David Reynolds, the commissioner of AIS, about that. And then last, I want to make sure that we touch on the sort of bigger overlying question that came up on the first day of these departmental hearings, which you were watching, Erin, with the Office of Budget Management, Department of Finance, with Budget Director Susie Park and CFO Jenny Bennett, about how sustainable Lightfoot's plan is going to be to use this $1.9 billion in federal money to prop up the city's finances in the long haul, right?
Yeah, that was kind of a theme that I took from that first day of, budget hearings, when aldermen are kind of throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall, asking, Park and Bennett a wide variety of questions. But, this is one time income that's being used to, in part, set up new programs, new pilot programs, and bolster funding for things like mental health and public safety and violence prevention and affordable housing. And I don't know, the question is kind of like, so what happens, once this money runs dry? The city has until 2024 to allocate this, federal ARP money, has until 2026 to spend it. But yeah, it's a good question. What happens to programs like this proposed, guaranteed basic income program that, uses, I think it's 31.5 million of ARP money to send $500 monthly payments to, I think it's 5,000 families for a year. Okay, great. But what happens a year from now when that program, maybe it proves to be successful and the city wants to continue it? Budget officials have said, we'll look to, maybe outside money, or we'll find a way, to use city finances on this. But I think it, begs a good question to be asked.
I'm going to put in a quick plug here to listen to our previous podcast that came out 2 weeks ago, the Clubcast, that we did an interview with Jenny Bennett and Susie Park and Controller Raish Masoni, and had them try to answer this very question. And Bennett said something really interesting, which is that she thinks that some of these temporary investments are going to have a kind of stimulative impact, that they're going to help then the city collect more property tax revenue and sales tax revenues when they help the economy. Greg, based on what you're hearing so far, do you feel like that message has won over the aldermen who are really skeptical about this? What's your sense of, how the city council is feeling about this sort of long range ARP spending plan?
Well, I think it's a goodie bag, right? And again, I'm not trying to be pejorative to the important stuff, but for a lot of these guys, it's a goodie bag. And so they're not, I think there are aldermen that legitimately are worried about the long-term effects of it, but it's less than you would think, like if the city council was filled with fiscal responsives, fiscally responsible people, we'd be in a much different place, and so I don't think it's, I think the sustainability isn't going to be that big a deal breaker for people. I think some people will want more because, getting stuff now is better than 10 years from now or 5 years from now from their perspective. And so I think, I don't think that's something that's going to be a major hang up. Obviously, there were some people who were upset that she's going to try to use some of it for revenue for the loans and things like that, and try to do some creative accounting and all that, which is fine, but like, the number of aldermen that genuinely care about that probably fit on one hand.
Yeah, we heard a couple of folks raise questions about that. I know that like Anthony Beale, who's really critical of the mayor, was asking questions about that, but I think that you tend to be right that when we're talking about aldermen and they're looking at the consequences of something, it tends to be, within a window of between now and 2023, just sort of based on the reality of everything. Having said that, let's move on to the process that is happening right now, these sort of negotiations that aldermen are trying to have with the administration. The way that they are, for the most part, approaching these conversations is by sort of forming together in their caucuses and trying to advance specific caucus priorities. Greg, you broke a story last week about a meeting that Lightfoot personally had with Villegas and about 8 or 9 other members of the Latino caucus. And Erin, did some other reporting on that meeting after that. But Greg, what happened in that meeting? Apparently it did not go great.
No, it was interesting. It was like a flashback out of 2020 where, it was just very contentious. The mayor was upset that they criticized her hiring record and let them know. The mayor went on a spiel where, one of the aldermen, the Latino caucus, most of them support the UBI, the guaranteed basic income, excuse me. Most of them support that. One of them or 2 of them don't. And so one of them was asking about that. And the mayor went on a big spiel about, well, the Black Caucus doesn't, the Black Caucus thinks I shouldn't be doing it because, they want, they're more, they're concerned about reparations, which Jason Irvin has recently said publicly, and they want more investment. And then she said, I've poured an F ton of money into the Black community. And she said that, and she got into it with them about some of that. And I think it was actually a real big turnoff for most of the aldermen present, because it was, it's not like they came in guns blazing, and it went poorly. And she had a subsequent meeting with the Black Caucus that was nowhere near as contentious, but I'm not trying to jump it.
Right. So, I mean, you had also broken the story last year that you were just talking about how she last year had a pretty contentious meeting with the Black Caucus. And this is something that I think Lightfoot has maybe gotten a bit of a reputation for, it as not being as much of a bridge builder and willing to compromise as someone who is really just sticking to her guns. How much does her own personal sort of negotiating style weigh on this process of passing a budget?
Well, one of the comments, as I've heard it from several sources, the Latino caucus meeting was a smorgasbord, but Alderwoman Tabarez was asking about the UBI thing and about the property tax, and the mayor gave a decent, respectful answer from what's been conveyed to me in general, explaining that people are hurting, they need the guaranteed basic income. But she ended the spiel with a comment to Tabarez that was something like, I think it was actually, if you don't want to vote for my budget, don't vote for my budget, which is, it's just aggressive, right? It's unnecessarily aggressive. And, Tabarez represents a conservative Southwest Side ward. I understand why she voted no last year and why she may and perhaps likely will vote no this year. But it's not a good way to have a conversation. And, the mayor does that to a lot of people who could be allies. But, the flip side of that is she feels that she needs to be tough and that people also respect that. So it works out. But, along those same lines, like, I don't think it's gonna have an effect on how Felix Cardona votes. But as I put in the story, Felix Cardona very gently asked her about Latino hiring, and she comes back and is like, I've been offended and insulted by the way you guys have talked about this issue. And Felix, I think people watching this, but for anyone who know Felix, but if you don't know Felix Cardona, he's like the nicest guy. He's just like, he's not, he's not a
barnstormer.
Yeah, he's not a firebrand. He's not there he wasn't trying to embarrass her or go at her. And she was going after everyone else in the room more than him. But it's just one of those things where, as Felix told me afterward, you catch more bees with honey.
Right. So the caucus was, like you were saying, they were advocating the guaranteed basic income program and expanding that beyond the $31.5 million that Lightfoot had proposed. Erin, what were some of their other priorities that they were trying to get across in this meeting?
Yeah, so I've been talking to Alderman Villegas for a while, basically, trying to get a sense, even, over the summer, trying to get a sense of what their priorities are. And obviously, one of these big things is, racial parity in city hiring, and especially as it comes to, more powerful, top positions with the city. And one of those things they held the Latino caucus held a press conference right before the mayor's budget address, and kind of, displayed these huge report cards that gave her like failing grades on Latino hiring.
Which is what she said she was offended by, right, during this meeting.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. And so there's also been this resolution that's introduced for calling for a Latino Advisory Council and Hispanic Inclusion Plan. And it's kind of, it's based on the state's Hispanic Employment Plan, and it would require basically this volunteer advisory board who would work with the city's HR department to produce once or twice a year reports on the city's progress in hiring, from the Latino community. I think that's interesting. I don't know. We already know what the progress is, and that the Latino caucus is not happy with it. I think if this is I don't know if this is, something that's going to get taken up or approved, but if it does, I'd like to see how it'll actually affect hiring or not.
Yeah, and I mean, diversity in hiring has been an ongoing issue, with the city forever. It's still disproportionately male and white, the city staff, and you'd have to imagine that endeavor is going to be even harder now that the city is just generally short-staffed and sort of scraping to get new hires anywhere that it can. The Black Caucus has been negotiating, it seems, much more behind the scenes. They have not been holding press conferences. This image, by the way, here is from 2019. Which is why they're sort of in pre-COVID formation there. But they have not been holding press conferences. They haven't been introducing ordinances. It's been much more, which I think speaks to, Alderman Irvin's style, the chairman of the Aldermanic Black Caucus, is to sort of, work with the mayor as opposed to trying to pressure her in public. I think we knew very little about the Black Caucus's specific priorities. We knew that in sort of broad strokes, they wanted more resources for community development and violence prevention on the South and West Side. But only in the past couple days have the details started to come out of their actual asks from the budget. We've done some reporting on this, and then Franz Bierman at the Sun-Times sort of blew it wide open with a story last night with a couple of interesting notes. One, that they want to beef up money for violence prevention and specifically some of these anti-violence, call them violence interruption street outreach programs. And in part, they want to do that by taking the $31.5 million that would have gone to this guaranteed basic income pilot and put it directly into violence intervention. A sort of, parallel piece of that from a kind of management side of things. There has been a long-running and deep-seated frustration among a lot of Black aldermen about the violence interruption groups that the city is contracting with, these very big nonprofits like the Institute for Nonviolence and Metropolitan Family Services. Aldermen have sort of complained that these organizations don't really have a lot of relationships with their ward offices. And as we know, aldermen want to be able to have as much sort of hands-on engagement with them as possible. And so they're trying to change the city's RFP process to get more of those smaller anti-violence groups involved. And the Black Caucus, I had sort of forgotten about this. It hasn't come up as much, but remember that as part of Lightfoot's original budget presentation, she included this extra $100,000 annual allocation that was going to get to every single ward office for what she called human infrastructure. That was just, give out some Brookins bucks or whatever you want, and that'll just be your own money to use. And that was going to be $100,000 per ward for $5 million in total. And the Black Caucus is saying just more than double that to $12.5 million for $250,000 per ward. So that's going to be something else that they're pushing for. And they're also trying to get more money for housing and specifically for SRO preservation, for single room occupancy hotel preservation, which is also, it seems like, a priority of the Progressive Caucus. The Progressive Caucus has been advocating for, through a number of different amendments, has been advocating for more money for housing, for different kinds of direct assistance, for, actually, interesting, we've started to see emerge a sort of oversight proposal coming from Alderman Martin Taylor and La Spada are in negotiations with the administration to try to get some kind of oversight body baked into the ARP spending, whether that looks like a city council subcommittee or some kind of contracted arbiter or something who can set a schedule for how much is being spent and monitor that. And another, I think, one of the biggest lanes of contention within budget negotiations right now is this proposal from Alderman Rossana Rodriguez-Sanchez to divert $10 million of the ARP funding that was going to go to the Chicago Department of Public Health and she introduced an amendment on this, from the Chicago Department of Public Health that was going to be used on mental health funding, and to specifically reopen at least some of the 6 closed mental health clinics that Rahm Emanuel closed down in 2012. And this actually is the only one of those amendments that so far has gotten co-sponsors from a majority of members of the city council. At least last we checked, it had 25 co-sponsors. And so the administration had no choice but to take this very seriously. And we saw Dr. Arwady, commissioner of the public health department, sign this long detailed letter to the city council saying, please don't do this. Please do not take away this $10 million that we were going to use on our own mental health program, which she described as this sort of big and growing patchwork of programming to, giving money to different, what's called FQHCs, federally qualified health centers in different neighborhoods. And we're growing and we're reaching more and more people every day. But if you take all that away and make us embark on this like years-long process of trying to build up public mental health clinics, it's going to take longer. We're not going to be able to reach as many people. And so there were briefings, as we understand it, all day yesterday between the health department and aldermen, where they were trying to make that case. The administration was trying to make that case. It's sort of still to be seen how many minds they changed. But Rodriguez Sanchez's argument is, no, we don't want to continue to privatize mental health care. They want to continue to put that money directly in city-run, city-administered mental health care, where she says, the pay is better, there's less turnover, they're represented by unions in a way that has reminded me a little bit of the argument over, CPS switching to charter schools and school choice over the past 20 years. This argument of, from the sort of lefty and democratic socialist crowd that, no, we want to retain everything under the sort of public umbrella where it has more accountability and they would argue better results. So that is a huge bone of contention that we're seeing play out right now, and that we're going to be keeping a really close eye on, that $10 million for mental health clinics. There were a number of other amendments that were introduced, and the what's called the Chicago Budget Coalition, this sort of amalgamation of progressive aldermen and then groups like United Working Families. They held a press conference outside of City Hall this morning. That picture is from that press conference. They were making the case for that. Can you just, Erin, quickly talk us through what were some of the other amendments that this group had proposed and filed with the city clerk's office as part of this push?
Yeah, so Alderwoman Haddon had two proposals. One of them would basically eliminate 300 of the existing vacancies in CPD. Those would be the 300 that essentially the city cannot logistically fill. Next year, in her argument, is kind of like, if we're not going to be able to fill those positions, the money shouldn't just be sitting there. We should be able to use it. And that would be approximately $44 million saved in that line of the budget. And that could be used somewhere else. And while it's not tied to any sort of spending, plan, we were talking earlier this week, and she said it could, be used to help bolster funding for a non-police response to, emergencies, and it could also be used for another proposed amendment that she has to dedicate $70 million to preserve existing single room occupancy buildings, and that would be, that's distinctly separate from, the plan to create new SRO buildings, because if you're just only creating new single room occupancy buildings and not preserving what's existing, a lot of the buildings are old and need work. So that would essentially help with the some portion of the city's affordable housing crisis. And yeah, Alderman Ramirez Rosa also has a proposal to end the city's contract with ShotSpotter. This has been kind of, covered for the past few months, and the city extended its contract with ShotSpotter in December, to last until August 2023. And it's, reports from the MacArthur Justice Center and the OIG Public Safety Department have said, it's not effective at detecting, evidence of gun violence or leading
ShotSpotter, we should say this is a sort of automated, technology that the police department has been using to put these detection devices all over the place, and they're supposed to record whenever there's a gunshot and feed that information back to the police department's sort of central command. And now there have been all these questions about whether it's accurate or useful, or whether it's doing more harm than good.
Yeah, or effective at leading to, arrests for gun violence. So yeah, there was supposed to be a hearing earlier this month, I think, on ShotSpotter, but that got delayed until next month. And so we'll see how that plays out in this budget amendment. Alderman Spada, has a proposal to dedicate $50 million for lead pipe replacement. We've already talked about that, and proposal for $10 million for eviction counseling, which is perhaps useful if there's a wave of evictions waiting to happen.
Yeah, and if we're doing them at 10 a year and we're paying 50 million for it, that's like 5 million per. So I could get down for one of those contracts.
So Greg, as we get into this home stretch of final negotiations between the city council and the mayor's office over the budget, what are you watching most closely right now?
I think it'll be very interesting how many of the conservative Northwest, Southwest side, people like Tom Tunney, people like, the bulk of the no votes.
Matt O'Shea, Anthony Napolitano.
Yeah, and I'm very curious if, like an Andre Vasquez and Maria Haddon, if they stick with yes from last year, if they go no. I'm very curious to see, do they win over someone like Rosanna? Because there's a lot of good stuff for her on this, do they win over someone? Who flips, who doesn't? Is it going to be as tight as last year? It's earlier I was talking about how it's ominous, but it's I do think it is somewhat foreboding, like it's not clear to me how this is going to shake out, and I don't think they know yet. But that's sort of what I'm looking out for. I think it's very it's going to be very interesting.
Definitely. So again, the next big vote to watch is tomorrow's City Council Finance Committee at 10 o'clock. The committee is going to be taking up the property tax levy and revenue ordinance. Before we move on, just want to put in another call for people to, I don't know if I'm pointing in the right direction, I think I am, to put in questions to the little chat box there. We will definitely get to them if we can. We have to talk about the ward remap, and we'll try to pick it up a little bit because we're running low on time, but it still seems like it's kind of early in the process, and aldermen are definitely more focused on the budget than they are on the remap right now. But our understanding is that Alderman Michelle Harris, who is the chair of the Rules Committee and running this process, has set up her little map room and is letting some aldermen into that room in groups to sort of figure things out. Erin, you have talked to Chairman Harris about this. What is she saying about the process right now and sort of where everything stands in that?
I think my conversation with her painted still kind of a rosy picture of how this is going. So I don't think it's come to the point yet where, people are necessarily yelling at each other over ward boundaries. But, of course, she said people are going to have to, give up some stuff to get some stuff. And she mentioned, her ward is moving west, and she's never been that far west before. So that's something she's giving up. Yeah, I don't know. I can't imagine it's you walk into the room and there's, happy music playing and candy being offered. But she's supposed to be scheduling some like public hearings, I guess, on the remap, on the new ward map, based on different regions of the city. She said that schedule will be public. I'm kind of waiting for that. But yeah,
she has been saying this for months, by the way.
Right.
That they're going to be all public hearings. We haven't seen any so far, and the clock is really ticking on this. We have until December 1st for 41 aldermen to agree on the map. Otherwise, it's going to go to a voter referendum to decide, 2 or more possibilities.
And on the subject of remap and budget and where they interlock very much is, in 2019, Mayor Lori Lightfoot was no friend to Jason Irvin, and Jason Irvin was no friend to Lori Lightfoot. And now they have each other's back. It's a really interesting alliance, and it's very interesting to see how that might play out in terms of the remap, and whether or not, Jason is Alderman Irvin has a very strong position about, I'm not giving anything up. We're not shrinking even though the population has shrunk. And you wonder, where Mayor Lightfoot will go with that, because she has developed, you know, like a very powerful relationship with Jason Irvin that she did not have before. But she also has, you know, if Lori Lightfoot could just make it happen by herself, you know, we would have an independent map, right? Like, but she can't just make it happen by herself. And so, it's very interesting, but that's something that, that relationship between her and Chairman Irvin is very interesting.
Yeah, and it's a little bit murky because, like you say, technically the process is still 100% in the hands of the city council, but it's also being run in a major way by Harris, who's arguably Lightfoot's closest ally in the whole council. So you'd have to think, will have some say in the process, if not, you know, a technical role to play. You know, it's interesting when I look at the remap because there are two, I think, conflicting goals by the Black Caucus and the Latino Caucus, where the Latino Caucus is trying to grow, sort of fundamentally reshape things to grow the number of Latino majority wards in the city. There are, what is it, I think 11 or 12 Latino majority wards right now, which is an outside, like an undersized representation of the city's Latino population. Black Caucus is 18 majority Black wards, which is an oversized representation of the Black population in the city. And so, like you said, Greg, Irvin of the Black Caucus is trying to hold on to that 18 number. Villegas and the Latino Caucus trying to grow the number of majority Latino wards. And I have to think that the Black Caucus has at least one fundamental kind of current on its side here, which is that, like, at the end of the day, all of these aldermen pretty much want to see their own wards that got them elected change as little as possible, right? I just got done covering the Cook County remap, which is, you know, a very different process, also done by commissioners. But really, the starting point was, all right, how do we keep it as similar as possible to what it is right now? And you really get the sense of that from all these aldermen. Like, yeah, our wards are shaped in crazy ways, but these are the constituencies that elected us 2 years ago. And so the incentive is for them to stay as much like that as possible. And you've got to imagine that it's hard for the Latino Caucus to fulfill its goal of sort of fundamentally reshaping things to add to its ranks if you know, that incentive is not there. Real quick, the other question is whether there is going to be a majority Asian ward created. You'd think it would probably be on the near south side of the city. You know, proportionally, Asian American, or Pacific Islanders make up about 6% of, I believe, of the city of Chicago, and have zero representation in the city council right now. And this is a question of, if there is no one in the city council to advocate for that, will we get a majority Asian ward? Something we're going to be watching. I'm going to move on unless anyone has any other specific remap thoughts. We should quickly touch on this, I'll say, very eventful city council meeting that happened last week. The biggest, I think, takeaway legislation that passed was that the council, in roughly a 40-10, I don't remember the exact vote, approved this very long brewing ordinance to legalize a scooter program. Scooters are coming back. We can expect them probably next spring. 3 companies are going to be invited to apply for licenses. Presumably it's going to be Spin, Bird, and Lime, which are the ones that participated in last year's pilot program. Lyft is also going to be able to leverage its current management of the divvy system to add some scooters. So that eventually passed. You see Chairman Brookins of the Transportation Committee talking about it here. A number of aldermen, led by Andre Vasquez and Rod Sawyer, deferred and published, meaning delayed an ordinance to direct the police board to find a way to create an appeals process for people to take their names off of the police department's gang database, which is about to become the Criminal Enterprise Information System. That new system has been promised for months and months. It is overdue. No one really knows when it's going to come online. And so these aldermen said, we don't know anything about the new system, so we don't feel comfortable creating a process to get people off of it. I don't think we have quite enough time to get into the substance of what Anthony Beale's 2 proposals were that he had tried to get passed. So I was not physically at this meeting. I was watching this part, but like, okay, Erin, can you just explain sequentially sort of what happened when Beale tried to get these 2 proposals heard?
Yeah, so these two proposals before last week were in the Rules Committee. They made it out of the Rules Committee. They're set to officially be reassigned, and Alderman Brendan Riley and seconded by Alderman Ariel Raboyes.
Deferred and published.
Yeah, these two proposals from Beal, one to lower, the threshold for speeding tickets, or raise the threshold for speeding tickets, and another to create a separate parliamentarian and legal counsel for the city council. It was a mess. I asked a question about it during the press conference. The mayor told me it was inside baseball. I know it was inside baseball, but that's what
still our government,
how the city works or how the city doesn't work. And essentially, Beal's proposals were delayed again, the reassignment of his proposals were delayed again. I think it's clear that the mayor does not support his proposal to raise the threshold for getting being issued a speeding ticket in these, certain areas, because part of her 2021 budget was to lower the threshold as a safety measure. But Beal says it's a money grab. His proposal to create separate legal counsel and parliamentarian for city council, obviously he supports it. It has a lot of aldermanic support. The mayor has said that she supports it. But it's still not going anywhere. And it was introduced a while ago. And even before Beal introduced this proposal, I think it was Alderman Irvin introduced a resolution calling for like a report on what this would look like. So this has been for a while. People say they support it. Perhaps it's a power struggle going on behind whatever doors, but yeah, and it kind of demonstrated, because there was disagreement over what Alderman Riley could or couldn't do, and the mayor said, he's in the right. He can do what he,
right,
motioned to do. Beal cannot, he's out of line, and it brings to the point that perhaps if the city council had its own parliamentarian, it might be different.
I mean, that's sort of the irony here, is that is the proposal that was getting shafted through these parliamentary procedures. And basically what happened is that it was deferred and published. Beal, in protest, sent about 36 ordinances to the Rules Committee, which is a similar thing that Alderman Moore did, a couple months ago at a protest for when one of his proposals was deferred and published. And then in just this incredible kind of surreal moment, Brendan Riley comes up, President Pro Tempore of the City Council, ally mostly of Lori Lightfoot, comes on and says, motion to suspend the rules and re-refer all of those ordinances back to their original committees. And then Lightfoot is just like, hearing no objections to order. Anyway, moving on. We've got it. And it's just like, how did that just happen?
And I think her response was like, there were no objections, so it was fine. But like, if you sit in those meetings, that moves pretty quickly. It's not like, okay, here's this thing on the table. Does anyone have any objections? No, okay, we'll move on. I mean, it moves pretty quickly. So yeah,
it was a very skilled move by Alderman Riley on behalf of the mayor.
Yes.
Greg, your colleague John Byrne was tweeting along to this, and I think this moment kind of like broke him. He was like, how did this just happen? Is this really the way that government works? I mean, what does that tell you about the dynamic in the city council right now, the fact that this was all able to happen?
Well, and it's not like I'm weighing in on Beal's side or on the mayor's side, but the situation is preposterous that the chair is the mayor, and the mayor oversees this independent body, but the independent body is entirely reliant on the executive branch for legal advice and for parliamentary advice. It's ludicrous, in the U.S. Senate, which is its own dysfunctional body in its own different ways. You have a real parliamentarian who can make sure that rules are being followed, and it pisses off Democrats and Republicans in that chamber. But you have a fair body, and the city council is sort of a kangaroo court sometimes, right? And so it's really remarkable that the city council is entirely reliant on the executive branch.
Yeah, I think that this is a great opportunity to, again, I want to put in a plug for the Clubcast. The most recent episode that came out on Monday was with now departed through one means or another, Inspector General Joe Ferguson, who was saying it really speaks to the fact that the city is, of all the 10 largest cities in the country, Chicago is the only one without any kind of charter or constitution that people can go back to and actually like refer to or sue over when it's violated, which means that the government that is in place right now, and specifically the mayor, if she is able to control a majority of the city council, can pretty much make up the rules in essence as she goes along and just run it the way she wants. We're just about out of time. We had a couple miscellaneous news items on here we wanted to touch on, but Greg, you've been covering a lot of these things. I want to just leave it up to you to give a sort of parting note on whichever of these 5 topics you think people should know about.
Well, you know, the Inspector General report, the Inspector General situation is just about the most important long-term situation currently facing. That and the FOP thing, you know, if a bunch of cops end up getting fired or quitting, it's a real serious problem long-term. It's a problem that the department has that you guys touched on eloquently. I would have been interested if the budget hearing was now versus versus when it was for police because of how much that dynamic has been sort of poisoned. The mayor doesn't like Joe Ferguson very much anymore, even though she wrote that nice note for him. But we're far behind in appointing someone, and the city needs someone good because the city does not police itself, and and so that's a really long-term story to pay attention to. And I thought that I'm following very closely the search for a new IG, and I think that is something that people need to pay attention to.
Definitely. Just a tiny bit of background on this, Ferguson announced in July that his term was going to be up on October 15th. He was going to be gone. He said, I'm deliberately giving you all this time so that you can start a search now, so that you can go through this new statutory process of composing a search committee between the city council and the mayor's office that will then come up with candidates and refer candidates to the mayor's office for the mayor to give a final pick. And then last month, Ferguson writes another letter being like, what the hell, guys? I gave you all this time. You haven't started on it yet. And so finally, they sort of got their act together and did it. But we're now in the situation that he precisely wanted to avoid, which was having an acting IG and a sort of gap while the search is going on. All right, we went just a little bit over time. We have to wrap it up there. Again, thank you so much to Erin for joining us. Thank you to Greg Pratt of the Tribune for joining us and having this great conversation. If you are not yet a member or subscriber of the Daily Line, you can go to dailyline.com/membership. If you don't want to sign up for our full Pro or Chicago or Springfield newsletters with tons and tons of information, you can sign up for the free newsletter. You can get sort of little bits and samples and follow our work. You can also follow us on Twitter, Alex Nitkin at Erin_Hegarty at Royal Pratt. We will give lots of updates there, and we will be watching for the rest of budget season. And we hope that you will be there with us. And thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Next time.
Great work.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. You too, Greg. Okay.